let Brian introduce himself. And you've been involved with the G20 since the very beginning in Australia. You heard some of that history maybe on the first day when Catherine mentioned it, and how we want to gather this to make the next year even more productive.
So, good morning, everybody. My name is Brian. I like long walks at sunset on the beach. And how the center, how the IF20 got started was we just knew that we just identified that in the G20 consultative process there was a gap where many of the places that could discuss the contribution that faith communities make to our communities, to world decisions, like the C20, for example, or were purposely excluding faith from the discussion. It was an opportunity to kind of make sure that they didn't have a voice in there broadly across the G20. And so we felt we need to have an explicit engagement with the G20 agenda, but from a faith-based perspective. And so we thought, but it's more than faith leaders. It's not, faith leaders aren't the one who do all the work. They're not the one who write all the papers. They're not the ones who make calls into their community on a daily basis trying to lift and strengthen. It's people who are in business, people who are academics or on the judiciary or who are leading civil society organizations. So we wanted to bring them together, along with faith leaders, of course, to have a united voice and put together these recommendations. And so that's kind of how it started. And it was very interesting to see. I mean, here we are 11 years later. We obviously touched upon a great need. It was clear that there was a thirst for this, and it continues to grow and do really well. Even though I'm no longer in the leadership, it's still, and that's kind of one of the best things in life. If you get something started and it goes on without you, that's when you know you've actually done something. And so I'm very proud of that. And I'm really so glad to be here, working with you and working on these issues. And I just hope we have some way to keep the work going, not just when we gather. And so those are a few of my thoughts.
So it's open mic. If you'd like to be identified in the notes, please say your name and your affiliation. But if you don't want to be identified, that's fine also, because you could also vet. So you can vent, you can give praise, you can give recommendations. It's really your session. So I'd love to have someone kick it off.
Thank you. My name is Tim Stratford, and I'm General Counsel of IF20. I was listening very carefully to the plenary on vulnerable communities, as you might understand. And there are a couple of things that really struck me, and they're consistent with what Brian just said. The first is that, I mean, it centers around the importance of the faith communities around the world. And as faith communities, we have some real strengths that are missing in the world today in other places. For one thing, our various traditions drive us to think in humanitarian terms about not leaving behind the vulnerability. This is a deep motivation that not only do we feel individually, but which unites us together and allows us to work together. And this is missing in so many other places in the world right now. Certainly in my own government, I see turning away from a sense of a responsibility for the vulnerable. The second thing is we are extremely well connected at the community level because of our religious communities. And at the same time, we're connected on a global level, which allows us to be, to marshal global resources to devote them to particular localities when there's a crisis in a particular locality. There have been studies that have shown that 84% of the world's population is affiliated with some kind of faith tradition. And if you have that massive percentage of the world's population connected globally, then they're able to fill in when governments often fail. And they're able to go to governments and have a real value proposition to the governments about why they should be working with us. So this is one of the strongest impressions I'm taking away from this conference, is how vital the faith communities are. And IF20 is one of the ways that we can unite our voices and organize our efforts.
Sherry Steiner, Purdue University. In terms of policy recommendations, my point would be that whenever policies are affirming self-determination, dignity, strengths-based actions, that it also attend to social forces so that we don't blame the victim, because some communities are more vulnerable than others, not because of them, but because there's inequalities. And so the affirmation of dignity and autonomy, I think, should always be accompanied by attention to injustice.
Just for those who are coming in now, this is an open session. We're passing the mic around. We're giving commentary on reflections from the last couple of days, any gaps in messaging you may or may not have heard, recommendations for the G20 in November, and also just advice for next year as well.
Oh, there are a few hands before me. Yeah, I think it's one of you, and then I'll go after.
So you and then you. And then
So I suppose my reflection is there seems to be a tension between charity and transformation, that some people have very quick fix solutions to vulnerable people's very complex realities. And I think we just have to guard ourselves against that, because we all want to do good, but we want the low-hanging fruits. So how do we create systemic change that we don't get confused in the quick fixes and almost, in my mind, devalue the complexity of vulnerability that we experience in the world. And I'm thinking of the 1951 convention. It's a group of laws that was specifically targeted against a very specific group of people who were extremely vulnerable following the Second World War. So the refugee convention is written in the context of Jewish people who had just experienced extreme persecution during the Second World War. And the world kind of realized we need to adjust our laws in order to make sure that some of the very vulnerable are protected. And so when we make laws, and I think this is my recommendation to the G20, when laws are enacted, who's at the center of it? And it can't be all people. I know there was a few years ago the idea of Black Lives Matter, and then people said, no, all lives matter, as though certain people were more vulnerable than others. So we know that our laws, if we really analyze it, protects a certain group of people. And so how do we shift that from an all, where the vulnerable get absorbed and lost, to a very specific targeted thing? It has been done. Can we do it again? And I think that is my suggestion.
Hello, I'm Shimona from the Baha'i International Community office in Addis Ababa. Maybe along similar lines, one thing I've been thinking about a lot is how can grassroots voices, especially those reflecting the so-called vulnerable populations, be integrated into decision-making processes at all levels, so that agendas are not set for them, but with them, so that their needs, their aspirations, their concerns are integrated into policies, so that there is a more comprehensive, more coherent approach to addressing the needs of those who we term as vulnerable. And my second point is maybe also how we conceive these populations. They're not just recipients of aid, and they're contributors to change. And so also how the language we use to conceive who they are is also important in the policies that we develop.
My name's Mark Hill. I'm a law professor in London, and I also practice law representing clients in asserting religious freedom rights. And I've been delighted to observe from the margins how Brian's gem of an idea has developed over a decade or more, and it really does need to be commended for what it is. I just want to make a couple of points. The first may sound trivial, but I think there's a deeper truth hidden in it. When the Archbishop delivered his keynote, it may have been a slip of the tongue, but he didn't say IF20. He said if 20. And I wanted to say, it's not if but when, and it's not when but now, because there is a real immediacy in what we're doing. And it's all very well having a talking shop, but we need to convert that talk into action. And we need to make sure, as I think Catherine has reminded us every morning, that we look into actions taking things forward. And there was a speaker yesterday whose words still ring in my ears, who said, the problem with South Africa, it has a great constitution, but a corrupt government. And I think, again, there's a deeper truth here, that we have constitutions, we have international human rights instruments, and they are wonderful. It's motherhood and apple pie. It speaks of the great value of religious freedom and being able to live out our religious identities. The real issue is converting that aspiration into a lived reality. And I think when we talk about vulnerable communities, what needs to be done is to give them a voice, to enhance their strength by getting vulnerable groups to stand together. And for those who have skills, who can be articulate on their behalf, to gather together and to make those arguments, so that what is an unachievable dream becomes a truth and a reality, because the constitutional rights which they have but can't exercise, and the international rights with all those treaties, which again they have, they possess, but they can't exercise, so that through court action, through government pressure and otherwise, they can become a genuine part of their human identity.
So to just follow up on these, I would comment, for example, on the complexity of where they don't have those laws, and that is where many of the refugees at this moment, unlike after the end of World War II, are impacted by climate change. And right now, in international law, climate refugees are not recognized. You know, if there's religious wars, they can get out, but not from rising oceans or desertification. So if we're going to talk about the affirmation of bringing in the voice of, say, Sudanese refugees who are in many ways impacted from the desertification of climate change, I would want to have, like in the IF20, or the IF20 now, to say, let's have webinars within the IF20 where we have climate refugees in Sudan in combination with people from the United States, where we call out our religious communities that are supporting policies of drill, baby drill, that's part of the problem that's creating the expanding deserts, because we have an obligation to not deny the science of climate change, and we have an obligation to speak to our own communities and call out the complicity and the denial in those communities, as uncomfortable as it is. Otherwise, we're not accepting responsibility for our communities in the United States that are part of the problem that's impacting vulnerable communities in Sudan.
And thank you, Sherry, for actually raising a good point there. This is not just an annual forum. So if you're familiar with the IF20 or IF20, now that we've recoined it in this room, there are ongoing activities, and so you should visit the website. There are webinars that are accessible internationally. There are blogs and the ability to contribute writing and reflections to these blogs and other kind of mediums. So please do continue to stay engaged, and that is part of what we're trying to collect here is some of that thinking and where we might go from here to spin off.
Just a historical footnote. When I proposed that it be called the IF20 several years ago, long before it was accepted, it was actually to kind of play off of this if, this aspirational possibility that we could have if we actually came together, if we listened to these voices, if we gathered together outside of our separations that are our religious designations, if we dared hope, then we could have this. So it's funny that you pick up on that. We've never documented that, so Sherry, maybe we have to at some point.
I think in the scripture, if those who are called by my name will turn.
That's a great one.
This young lady in the front, and then I know Hannah had her hand raised. Second mic.
Oh, you were
Okay, and then after.
You can go ahead.
Hi, everyone. My name is Whitney Headland. I am from the University of Notre Dame as a graduate student there, but right now I'm in Cape Town for 6 months with the Cape Town Interfaith Initiative, so representing them. Yes, South Bend, Indiana, yeah. And so just thinking about the gaps, I think some of the things that became apparent, the elephant in the room is lack of representation from women from the main stage, youth, African spiritualities. But I was also thinking about the just lack of representation from direct vulnerable communities. If we think about the state of the world and what we're called here to do, it really is to listen to the margins. And so how can we platform voices from the margins who don't have the opportunity to travel to Cape Town? But how can we use the main stage as a place of actually hearing directly from communities who are facing genocide? You can think about Palestine, we can think about South Sudan, we can think about DRC. How do we platform those voices so that we have a place to rally around? If we're not called to be in solidarity with the vulnerable, then what are we called here to do? So that was one thing I would have really liked to see more of, in hearing those stories without tokenizing them, but with meaningful representation and also engagement with those communities. And also calling out each other in love. I'm from the US, and I understand it's going to be hosted in the US next year. How do we call out US complicity in creating vulnerabilities cyclically? And I know that's a very political thing to do, and I know that's not an easy thing to do, but how do we leverage our own power as, for those from US or from Western countries that have influence? How do we have sessions that strategize how we leverage our own power to put pressure on our governments that are creating these vulnerabilities? And so that's another thing I'd like to do. So exactly to your point, we are complicit, as I'm complicit as an American. How do I leverage my power to advocate to my representatives or my government in a way that's actually meaningful and that can, so advocacy, just really focusing on advocacy, what the individual can do to put pressure on those who have power. But yeah, I think the balance of power, again, from the main stage as well, just having more representation from women, having meaningful, not tokenizing representation from women, youth communities. I'm not a youth. I'm not youth, but we need to have the youth voices from the main stage, and what can that platforming those voices do to kind of shift power imbalances? So yes, that's all. Sorry.
My name is Fred Axelgard. I'm proud to have been there, Brian, in 2014 when you kicked things off. I'd like to make a couple comments just about the maturity of the process overall. And one of the, I think, most important things for us as the Human Trafficking Initiative was the representation here, participation here of the co-leader of the W20. I just want to maybe broaden that as a suggestion that we make the IF20 make a more concerted effort to reach out to the engagement groups, to draw them in to efforts like this. I think Ann Benson is going to be a tremendous asset, or a collaboration with her is going to make a real difference. Anyway, I'm not sure which of the other engagement groups you might think of, but that's, I think, worth thinking about. I think the G20, the F20 works, the objective is to impact on the G20 policymaking process, but I think we found out in the course of, and perhaps Ahmed, you can correct or reinforce this. In the process of working the human trafficking panel, because we were told to work in a modulus format, we have been working together for several weeks to try and figure out how to make that work. One result of that is we will have an immediate, this panel will have an immediate impact in the local community, in the local interfaith. There will be, yes, the connectivity, for example, that the sisters organizations and the Anglican organization is making with the local prosecuting authority. They realize they have access now to somebody who's interested in developing capacity and prosecutions against human traffickers. The hope just that single connection makes was palpable in our setting. So I think, again, broaden the idea that we're here to make impacts on G20 policy. I think we're also can make an impact locally and immediately. I also think that the modulus format, there's going to be continuity. Our panel, I think, will continue to interact and work together and maybe help achieve some of these objectives that these local voices will project. I think that I think it's right to criticize or critique the IF20 for the trying to have a wide range of voices involved. But I think what we miss, for example, is the webinars. We've had a series of webinars on human trafficking for several months now, and 80% of the participants, if not more, are women in that. Some of them are youth as well. But there is and maybe that's fault on our part, not making it clear, as you alluded to, Christina, that the process is ongoing and wider. The other thing is just, Brian, for you in ACWE, in human trafficking, we've had a young woman from Denmark in the middle of our work for months. She didn't get invited here and therefore couldn't project her voice onto that stage. She's not officially a part of ACWE, but again, maybe to stretch the way we think about, is it only ACWE? If we don't have ACWE involved in our group, are we then not meeting that parameter? But I think it might also, again, Tim, to us as planners, consciously think when we issue invitations to come here, to reach out, encourage the different working groups, the different initiatives to get young voices and offer support to have them come and attend. And then specifically, I just, as I listened to the artificial intelligence panels and the extreme challenge they have of trying to develop a moral or ethical perspective to have an impact on the evolving AI world, that's a huge, huge challenge. And I then thought about human trafficking and modern slavery. How do we get this to where it should be from a moral perspective? And I thought, why not literally at the topmost levels in the faith traditions around the world? Baha'i, the Dalai Lama, the Pope, at the topmost levels, just see if we couldn't generate a simple statement from them that it is reprehensible from a moral perspective that in the 21st century, slavery on the face of the earth is expanding. So anyway, that's a very precise and concrete suggestion, but a very altruistic one perhaps. But some of these issues are just perhaps deserve that kind of attention.
Thank you. We've got Hannah in the back.
Yes, thank you. So I'm Hannah Smith. I'm an associate director at the International Center for Law and Religion Studies at BYU Law School, and I've been associated with the G20 now for several conferences, so it's wonderful to be here with you all. Just from a structural perspective on how the program this year was formatted and planned, One of my impressions has always been that the IF20, the foundational motivating principle of the IF20 was to inject religious communities' voices into the G20 process. And religious voices, whether they're individual or in community or institutional, can't be part of those initiatives unless they are allowed to thrive in their own countries. And so I think, the foundational principle of freedom of religion or belief really should be one of the core topics that the IF20 addresses. And at this conference, at least, there were 2 breakout sessions on that issue, but they were not plenary sessions, and they're not listed during this time period as one of the 5 core topics of the IF20. And I find that really problematic because religious communities, institutional or individual voices, can't be part of the conversation on education or human trafficking or debt and global finance. They can't be the voices on any of those conversations if they aren't allowed to exist and if they aren't allowed to thrive and prosper in their own countries. And so I think that as far as a structural approach and sort of programming approach, I would hope moving forward that the IF20 would put the freedom of religion and belief panel as a plenary panel and list it as one of the core topics for the IF20, because without it, foundationally, these religious communities aren't going to be able to exist to have any impact at all on any of these other topics. So I think that motivating principle of the IF20 needs to be refound and re-elevated to its proper place in our conversations. Because I think the panel, for example, that Mark Hill was on, that was a breakout session, those issues that they were addressing of the over-regulation of religion and the more autocratic impulses of African governments in suppressing freedom of religion are critical to the survival of these institutions across the continent. And if we don't address those and have a policy paper about those and try and impact that within the G20 process, we're not making any headway from a foundational level.
And I'll just add to that, because I went to that section of the breakout. There were also no women on the panel or moderators, so we can put that in the notes too. There were no women on that one.
You might want to say that again.
There were no women at all on the freedom of religion panel.
My name's Gabi Farber Cohen. I'm from the South African Jewish Board of Deputies. And something that has quite shocked me, I know it's been mentioned before, but it can't be over-mentioned, is the lack of representation of women and youth on the panels. It's all these things are to impact the future, and how can we make that impact without youth who are the future? And it's not just about having youth within the guests and the participants, it's about seeing them in the panels. And just like human trafficking was then recommended to the G20 on behalf of the interfaith communities, I would really request that one of the recommendations that gets put forward to the G20 is that when they have the G20, that there really is a representation of women and youth on the panels. And we not only request that, but we say as a religious communities, we demand that. And with that, if you look at biblical text, it's the woman who brought redemption to the world. It's the woman who took the tambourines when they came out of Egypt and danced through the sea. It's the woman who went and fought the wars. It's the woman who went and lit the candles in the darkness. And we need to see that, because when you see that in a panel, then you see that I can, as a woman, eventually be there, and that my voice as a woman, as a collective, is represented. And that these women discussions aren't just given to women audiences, because that often happens, that women are put in discussions, oh, you can only talk on women issues. And, you know, it doesn't need to be tokenized because we live children issues. We can talk on climate change. There's educated women, there's experts on these topics. And just that is, please, a recommendation to be put forward.
Can I speak? Can I make a follow-up comment on having freedom of religion in a plenary, especially next year when U.S. is the host? And I want to speak now, Sherry Steiner, not as the academic and the historian role, but I want to put on the hat of being a local member of my congregation on the session, on the board for the Fort Wayne Area Interfaith Cooperative. In my community, we decided to put a letter of support and send it to our denomination, thanking them for being part of a lawsuit of 26 denominations against the current administration for ICE, the arresting agency, being in a congregation to arrest someone. And immediately, the people in my congregation, in fact, people burst into tears at our session when we were discussing whether or not to vote on communicating our letter of support for the lawsuit, because they were terrified. We have a Korean congregation that's part of our congregation, and we have a daycare center. And the ministers have an escape plan for if ICE shows up. They have places where people are going to try to go so that they don't end up in a detention center. So this is relevant to next year.
Yeah. For those who may have attended yesterday, the refugee and migration side session that Lance and I were on, we brought up some of these issues also in the U.S. context, but here locally as well.
Okay. Somboon from International Network of Engaged Buddhists. My friend said this IF20 is like we are fasting for 20 hours. Just joke. I have 2 points. One is about the structure of the conference. Like, for example, when we talk about vulnerable communities, we should be identify 5 or 10 target groups that we are going to carry on and focus on as a working groups. And next year we can come back and report to the big forum, which is that can be continuing, ongoing, something that already discussed, something already progressed, something that can be do further. This kind of thing is a kind of momentum. And also, I think otherwise, I attend this for a few times. Every time is something like come back and discuss again. And of course, there are quite a number of new people who have been joining and so on. But I think this kind of the structure that can help to see what will be our action, what are the progress, what are the achievements that we have been doing further. That's one. Second is there are so many forums like this, like Religion for Peace, the Network of Religious and Traditional Peacemaker, and others. It's ongoing. It's similar, like a parallels. The conferences, which is sometimes some of these representatives from different platforms, they come and join, but it's not really. It's, as my observation is more like a parallel rather than weave it together. I think that is more the problem with the structure, the way we design and also link up with the other networks. Thank you.
How are our note takers doing? Doing good? All right. It's a lot to capture,
Yeah.
but I think it's important.
This is my Dr. Ahmed Bukri from the African Union. I think I want to commend this process of the IF20 because, especially in particularly in Africa, faith is very important to people, and faith leaders are given prominence in local decision-making processes, but also national decision-making processes. For example, before there is a summit at the African Union, there's always a prayer breakfast. And this prayer breakfast is led by former presidents who are Christians and active in their community. This year it was extended to include other faith groups. And I think that if we want to look at the regional specificities, this was held here, but African issues were not so much emphasized. It was not discussed deeply. And one of the issues that I would recommend is that we look at what the regional groupings are dealing with at a particular time. So for example, in Africa this year is the question of reparations, which is justice and repair. And faith-based communities have a much authoritative voice when they speak about that. You see, the politicians usually do not want to rub feathers with each other. So they might be very diplomatic, they might go there and say things, but we have a moral voice to kind of take what the politicians are saying and demand for accountability. So if we're looking at vulnerable groups, let's say here, conflict is a very important issue because conflict and climate change are linked. Conflict and colonialism are linked. Conflict and apartheid is linked. And so you look at the root cause of it. And as faith leaders, you can then speak to these issues that the politicians cannot speak about. They know the issues. So for example, now the relationship between Africa and the US, people here are very silent. The issue of Gaza came up, but it should have been discussed. And I was in one of the sessions where when we wanted to go deeper, there was resistance. People felt this is politics. But it's not politics. It's just that we as religious or faith-based communities look at humanity as humanity. So in discussing vulnerable communities, we need to look at their issues in specific terms because in our religious organization, especially as a Christian in the church, you are dealing with refugees, but you're dealing also with mental health. You are dealing with, in our trafficking group, we were looking at the vulnerabilities of the families and how to build collaboration between all the silos. And I think that this is where I agree with you that IF20 should not be a parallel process, but it should be a collaborative process. So in terms of inviting people, there can be a learning experience of the best practices, if I may use, for lack of a better word, and that we are wider in the way that we are looking at bringing other people in. But the influence of IF20, and I was just discussing this with Fred, within the context of going to institutions. For example, at the African Union, they would listen when you bring faith issues. Why? Because it raises the issue of peace. And once you sit down and you say, we come in with a message of peace, we come in with a message, of course we're dealing with these issues, but we have the moral authority to speak to you to find a solution to it. And I think that in one of the sessions, there was Ambassador Salah from the African Union who spoke about peace and how the African Union is beginning to realize the importance of faith-based communities. So in other regions, it might just be another thing, but I think on this continent, we have a great, great opportunity to influence not only policy, but to change behavior.
some people, I'm cognizant, some people have had the mic several times. Are there, because we're going to be running out of time soon. Oh, sorry. The one directive I was given for this is that we have to end right on time to go back down for 9:45. So we've got 7 minutes, and I'm cognizant that some people have not gotten a chance to speak up, articulate, whether that's the youth, whether it's the moderator of the panel that just was referenced. So I'm going to pass it to Reverend Susie.
3 short points, suggestions for the organizers for the next gathering. One, I just want to affirm what my brother just said about being able to speak about some of the most sensitive issues, including Gaza. The relationships that we've built and that we're seeking to build across faith divides and political divides and geographic divides and so on, that is a test of it, our ability to speak with depth about some of these very sensitive issues. That's what we're seeking to do, and it's if we're not able to do that, I think that says something that might be very tough to acknowledge and to recognize about us not achieving our stated ideals and goals. 2, when we're talking about inclusion of women and youth in other vulnerable communities, the poor, the disadvantaged who can't make it to Cape Town or don't get invited to Cape Town, who don't speak English, et cetera, et cetera. I just want to make sure we're not inviting them to a table that's already set. So sprinkling in women or youth to a format and to panels that are already established and the topics decided and the processes decided and so on, but are there from the very beginning to shape it. And one thing I've been thinking about a lot is how we can use this over the past few days is how we could be better using technology platforms to have more inclusive discussion. There's a lot of people talking and a lot of passive listeners in these sessions, but we have so many technology tools and everybody has their phones, I see, and a lot of people have their laptops as well. How can we be using those to be having live discussions about these things? And then also engaging people who are not in these rooms and these topics that we're discussing throughout the time and have that feed into our panel presentations and our dialogues in real time. I don't think this is a sort of very antiquated process that we're using here, which I don't say as a critique of the organizers and the incredibly hard work that goes into organizing these things. But I just think we're missing an opportunity to take advantage of new technological platforms to widen and broaden and deepen the discussions that we're having here in ways that can be impactful and that will allow us simultaneously to capture what people are saying for the record in ways that can be better than shared with the G20 and impact the G20. Because when people are writing those things in, then you have them written down. Okay, thank you.
Morning. Khadija, MJC, Muslim Judicial Council, Women's Forum. Just to say, in terms of vulnerable communities, one of the very big fallout of vulnerable communities is mental health. And oftentimes, it is not seen as an actual deep fallout, and yet it impacts so intensely the concept of vulnerable communities. I sat in on the human trafficking last night, and I had been reading up on issues happening with the orphans in Gaza. And it was for me devastating to know that there's a pedophile structure waiting to catch these orphans. And it is done within the name of the United States. They are in the countries UK and US. It is happening right under our noses. And unless we speak the difficult topics, we speak it because it is not the only place. Sudan is happening the same. In many other places of the world, this is happening. And unless we are prepared to have the difficult conversation, the one that says that as a faith community, and we have the resource, the greatest resource on earth is a faith community. Unless we speak the language and we do the action that assists in holding vulnerable communities because they are people of faith. We are going to find ourselves having a fallout that we are not able to contain. So I pray that through all of the sessions and the greatness that is happening within the IF20, and yes, not so much even for the G20, that we find a way to deal with the upside down ways that things have happened in this last couple of years, how, what is human rights, what is women's rights, that have just, it has flipped. We know that it only deals with certain people in the world, and others are still vulnerable. So our work is cut out for us.
We only have time for our last two. Go ahead, and I'll bring out the return, and then we'll have to close this out.
I'll be very quick because I've spoken already, but just thinking about the effectiveness of the format, but just how can we effectively address the needs of the vulnerable. And it's such a unique opportunity bringing all of you together. There's so many different voices and perspectives and experiences in this forum, that how can it be a conversation? And not just about what I do, but more about how can we serve those that are, in need, not in need, I don't like the word in need, but, serve our communities. In a way, then how can we foster a consensus and a collaborative and consultative environment? Because I think was mentioned, it's just a few voices that are heard. So then how can a conversation ensue for the next one? To benefit also from people's experiences and perspectives, because this is now suggestions, right, for an agenda, for a very high-level agenda. But then if we only benefit from few voices, it's not maybe doing justice to those in our communities.
Hi, my name is Marilyn. I'm from Religions for Peace. So I just wanted to also be in agreement with the comment mentioned about freedom of religion and belief. As a youth, I'm working a lot in those spaces, and there's a big youth movement. So I was surprised to see it wasn't incorporated in this program and in this conference. And that's something to be considered, as mentioned. The other thing is, I just want to agree with the two gentlemen's comment about there's so many organizations doing so many things, there's so many conferences. And, for me, it feels like we're repeating these things in each conferences. We should be working together collaboratively and not parallel to each other. So I agree on those comments. And the other thing for me is what I found refreshing about this particular conference, which I've never experienced before, and I've been to many conferences with many organizations, is that the service program that we had, which was very inspiring for me. Because for me, when we're talking about vulnerable communities, it's about service. Not only grassroots initiatives, but actually doing some action to serve together. And that little exercise showed me that we could pack 33,000 meals in 2.5 hours, and it was all of us working together, having so much fun. But it didn't matter about our religion, our color, our race, our titles, our positions. We were there to serve together, and that's such a strong symbol and statement that I've never experienced before in any conference. And those vulnerable children will receive that service from us, which we did in just 2.5 hours. So that was amazing. If we could have more initiatives like that in conferences, I think it makes a big difference than it just being a talk show. It's also showing action. But also imagine if all of us collaborated together and did things together, what greater service we could do. I mean, I'll give you an example. I'm involved in the United Nations Environmental Program in a Geo7 process. It's taken 5 years to create a policy document that's literally talking about reversing the effects of climate change. 5 years to produce one document, so many processes, so many traveling around the world, so many meetings. But imagine if all of us, like in the action we did in service, planted trees within those 5 years, we would have already reduced climate change by now. Instead of putting documents and dialogues together, we did action, we reversed the effect, we planted trees that we are destroying the lungs of the planet, which is the Amazon forest. our action would have spoken way louder, and we would have had the solutions 5 years down the line instead of thinking of the solutions in 5 years. So that's just a reflection I wanted to share, and I think it's important to just also do service action, but do it on a national level, a global level, collaboratively with all these organizations. We can make greater progress. Thank you.
Thank you. Yes, I'm getting signs in the back that we have to cut. So I'm very sorry. We're just warming up and I see more hands raising. But I think that's actually a very positive note to end on. I know as Brian's been involved for 11 years, I've been involved for maybe 8 or 9. It was a dream of ours to bring the service project to fruition and to bring it to a conference. And we weren't certain how many people would actually participate, but we were honored by all the people that came and the good spirit of it, and that it also served a good cause. I think we'll make it part of the tradition moving forward, inshallah, as we say. So I want to thank you all. I hope we were able to capture some of your reflections in an honest way, and these will also be available afterwards, as is everything from the various sessions. But these reflections will come back to the organizers and will be taken to mind and to task for future convenings. And we want to thank you so much for your participation, and we hope to incorporate many of these recommendations. And I am asked to invite you back downstairs. I believe there's a short break before we go into our last 2 concluding sessions.